gosh, I love it. I love music. I love stories as much as I love music. Like People magazine. There's a few of you out there. I have a subscription, which, because I've been here for the past month, have been unable to receive at home. And I'll tell you, last night I had to pop out to the store and I picked up my copy of People magazine. The Jolie Pits are on the cover. I mean, come on. You know, I need to see what's happening, what's going on with them. Your life is a story. Are you aware of that? Your life is a story. My life is a story. You know, there are times where it's comedic. Yeah, I know, right? There are times when it's comedic. There are times when it's drama. There's times when there's poignancy. There's times where, you know, we just want to maybe tear up the manuscript and start over again. And we, to a certain extent, get to do that because we can reframe our story. At any given time in our experience of life, we can take a look at our story and ask ourselves, is there something more that can be added to this? Is there another way that we can look at it in order to garner from it new information, a new perspective, a deeper awareness, greater clarity, or to say, oh, hallelujah, thank God that's done with. And we do all of this when we think about our lives as story. We use story as a way of making meaning. It's a way of understanding and characterizing our journey in this plane of, you know, time-space. And the biggest stories, the most epic stories that have been told across the millennia are all the types of stories trying to answer, who am I, why am I here, what's the purpose of life, who created it? And they're the stories that are told through all of the great spiritual traditions. All of the religions are seeking to open to the mystery of the divine. And each of those paths are inviting those who follow it to do the same, to open to the mystery of the divine by learning, oh, teach me, beloved, your ways, that I may walk this path of greater knowing, of greater understanding. Across cultures, the stories are remarkably similar. There are stories of creation, there's stories of floods, there's stories of virgin birth, stories of awakenings, all sorts of stories trying to answer the same questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What created me? And we get to immerse ourselves in those kinds of questions and in that story so that we can make meaning of our own experience and our own walk in God. The particular lens that I want to once again work with today is through the lens of what has become the Christian story. And I want to do this in a way that I believe we can all resonate with, which is food. Anyone here not like food? Okay, just checking. Because food is something that we can identify with, it's familiar to us, it's common, and so we can look at how these kind of common ingredients can tell us a little bit something about this Christian story that I want to delve into today. Now, the first thing that I think we need to lay out here is that there has to be something to hold the story. If we think about a book or a magazine, you know, there's a front cover, a back cover, a story has a beginning, a middle, and usually an end. So there's something to hold it. When I think about the spiritual traditions, and particularly now the story of the Christian tradition, we have what is called religion. That is the structure that holds the story. It is the framework that the story is told through. Okay, with me so far? In our case, the bowl is representing this framework that we're going to put it through. Now, how many of you grew up with iceberg lettuce salad? Right? Very popular. Iceberg lettuce salad. I think of the iceberg lettuce in this unfolding story as the Gospels, the Bible, the letters of Paul. All of kind of like the fundamental, foundational aspects of our particular story. So we have our iceberg lettuce. Now, you add to this iceberg lettuce some tomato. Now here's the thing with tomatoes. Sometimes there's like a bad spot that you kind of cut away. There's a bruise that you want to work around. I think of the tomato as representing the rituals. So some of the rituals we've just completely cut out because for whatever reason, we don't like them. Some of them we've held on to, but the rituals were the rituals of the sacraments, perhaps, known as communion, baptism. We actually still go through some rituals that are very common in our lives: weddings, funerals, celebration of life. So those are also part of the way in which we see it in this story, the tomatoes, as the ritual. Now, adding into the foundational salad, we have the cucumber. And I think of the cucumber as the disciples, because they had to be just a little kooky to lay down their nets and go follow this itinerant rabbi that was walking through the land sharing his message. And I left the skin on the cucumber because I think the disciples were a little on the rough side. You know, they were fishermen. They were common people. So here we have our basic story, our basic Christian foundation. Okay? The iceberg lettuce salad that many of us grew up on. Whether directly by going through, going to church with your family, or indirectly because we are immersed in it. It is impossible for us to not have some influence of this basic Christian story. Now, what I find happens is oftentimes when people use the term, I am spiritual but not religious, what they're trying to express when we delve into that statement a little bit more deeply is that something about this structure, this framework, this salad no longer feeds them. It doesn't give you a sense of the divine. It doesn't nourish your spirit, your soul. In the words of Father Thomas Keating, who is one of the main voices in the contemplative Christian path, what he speaks of is that it is desirous for us to have a spirituality, a Christian walk that can expand with what we know about the world today, and in recognizing that we need additional nutrition in order to bring that experience of the divine home for us. That there are a lot of people that for whatever reason this particular story doesn't work. Now there are lots of people that it does work for. But there are also quite a few that are saying, I'm not liking the tomato, and the iceberg is getting a little lame, and I need something more. Well, for me, the way in which to have that expanded story, to be able to experience God while retaining this connection to my roots, came about through unity. It's part of my story. You're sitting here, I presume it's part of your story. You found your way here. So there was something that wasn't working for you before. You find your way to unity. And this is where I want to start expanding on the story. Now, Myrtle Fillmore, one of our co-founders, from her healing letter, she had this to say: unity teachings are based on the Jesus Christ teachings. We advise people to hold firmly and steadfastly to the principles that are taught and demonstrated by the first Christian metaphysician. We have found Jesus to be the great teacher, accessible to all who have faith in and understand the spiritual principles that are set forth. So first point, when unity is considering this walk in Christianity, what it is considering is the message, not the messenger. The first part of the consideration is what is the message and can we connect into that message? Unity, then, bearing in mind what Myrtle had to share, is baby greens. See, it's still lettuce, it's just different type of lettuce. So what do we add to it? Unity adds the idea of metaphysical Bible interpretation and looking at the Bible through these different lenses of being something that does have literal relevance, but also has in it the metaphorical, the allegorical, the mystical expression of the divine that we can connect to. We add to it this understanding that science and religion do not have to fight with one another, but in fact can work together and enhance one another. So we look to the great ways in which the new revelations that are coming forth through science today tell us about the cosmos that is around us and how vast it is. And science, much like spirituality, does not have the full answer, that it takes both. So we add these baby greens, this lettuce, into the foundational salad, realizing that we don't have to get rid of the lettuce, tomato, and cucumbers. What we are being asked to do is to add to it. Now, I have found that oftentimes when we start in a new kind of awareness, we have to go through a little bit of kale. That's the roughage. It's those spots where you're standing perhaps at a Unity church for the first time and you're going, huh? What are they talking about? Now, there's something about it that you know feels kind of familiar, but it's so kind of off of the beaten path that you're wondering what's going on here. So you move through a little bit of roughage. Maybe some of you experience the roughage when you try to tell your family what a Unity church is all about. You know, and they're interested in the lettuce, tomato, and cucumber, and they just like it that way. You know, so we all have to work through the roughage. Now, what I think roughage represents, at least for me and my story, is it gives me greater clarity. Because I have to kind of struggle with it. I need to be with it and say, oh, what's going on here? How is this trying to bring me greater clarity? And that's what roughage does, is that it moves through us, it kind of moves things out of the way, and opens us up to new possibilities. Now, aside from that, I also believe that it's important to have carrots. Now, here's the thing with the carrot. Because of the type of vegetable that it is, if you try to swallow it like this, you could possibly choke yourself. What you need to do with carrots is chew thoroughly in order for the carrot to become small enough to be taken in and digested. So what do we add to this great story? We're adding the fact that we as individuals also have to chew into this word. We need to chew into the message, chew into our experience, and make it into bite-sized pieces so that we can, in fact, begin to comprehend the spiritual journey that we're on. Not only comprehend it, but begin to receive the nourishment from it. Cilantro, which was grown in Egypt and in the Near East at the time of Jesus, and still today, is an aphrodisiac. And cilantro is the reminder of the sensuality of our spiritual journey. That it's not all about what goes on between our ears. It's not all about theory. It's not all about, teaching. It's about being able to engage in and recognize that there is a sensuousness about our being, about an honoring of our sensuality as human beings. I've spoken before about touch, but let's take it to the kiss, to the embrace, to the feeling of just passion and how that is. And that was an important part of what Jesus brought. This was a guy who loved to eat. This was a guy who partied with the boys and the gals. They would go and they would have wine and they would, feast together. And they would touch one another and they would hug. They would kiss. I mean, it was a very sensual, very earthy, grounded kind of experience. And so we bring that into this awareness, that it's not all about this ethereal kind of knowing, but it's about being really grounded in our bodies and in our experience with one another. For me, the colored peppers represent the many paths, the different ways in which the divine speaks to us, and how when we touch into these different spiritual traditions that we can enrich our own walk in God, that we can look at the best and the greatest of what meditation has to bring to us from perhaps the Buddhist or the Hindu tradition, which I've mentioned before. The Fillmores were deeply influenced by the Hindu tradition. We can look at how these different spiritual traditions can broaden our own story of what the nature and who the nature of God is. So our many paths, and the fact that we honor those many paths that lead to the one God. capers are ancient. They're a reminder that even in this 21st century expression of the mystery, there is ancient wisdom. I want to go back to Father Thomas Keating, for one of the things that he says is, why should we listen to someone who spoke 2,000 years ago? And it's because, in his opinion, you can never exhaust the wisdom of the divine. You can never hear too much. We can never practice too much forgiveness. We can never hear too much about oneness and the forgiveness of enemies, unconditional love, opening up to the mystery that is here with us today. And yet the capers remind us that it is ancient, ancient wisdom that we are drawing upon, that allows us to root ourselves very firmly in something that is real, something that has ground to it, has meat to it, and that it's not just some passing foray, but that it has something that is of value and endurance. And I think that that's an important piece of our spiritual journey, our spiritual awareness. Now, not everybody likes these, but anchovies, I know, you kind of grimace a little, but let me tell you about anchovies. They are incredibly salty. And what the anchovy does is it keeps us thirsty, keeps us longing and questing for more, to quench the thirst so that we continue to stay on the spiritual path. How many of you have experienced longing, this desire to want to know more, to experience more? And this is what the anchovies add to the walking in this expanded story, is that we can reach out and we can look at who are the contemporary teachers today, who are the writers that are adding to the beauty of what this story is that we are crafting as we're walking in God. And that what keeps us connected. It keeps us, going after that liquid, that nourishing water. Now, cheese, just because I like cheese. A little bit of nuts, because I think you have to be a little nuts in order to experience the mystery of the divine. You have to go beyond the rational mind. And then lastly, hibiscus flowers, for the sweetness of God, for the grace, the comfort, that love that we feel in our hearts when we can maybe run our tongue across our lips and taste the beauty of spirit. In the same structure, the same framework, holds a bigger story. It holds a different way of being able to experience the divine as we walk the teachings and the message in today's world. Now, it's a pretty salad when it's in a bowl. At some point, though, we, each one of us, need to get our hands into it and toss it and be with it and bring it together so that we aren't just walking away from bits, but we are really asking ourselves and experiencing for ourselves, how does it come together in my life? And that can only happen by you putting your hands into the salad, into the story, and making it your story. Because you see, you're the plate. You're the plate that the salad goes on. And then as I see it, the dressing is our own individual slant that we put on the salad. Because each of us has a slightly different experience of what it tastes like, a slightly different experience of the texture of it. There will be some who will look at the capers and go, and others who will want to pick out the peppers, perhaps. But yet, when we put the dressing on it, we are adding to it our own way of expressing the story that we are living. And it doesn't mean that you have to go for all the newfangled stuff, because you can still pull out the Miracle Whip. But the point is that you have to dress it for yourself. Now, I look at this picture and the water that's in it, and I recognize that in all of this salad, and all of this structure, and all of this story, that it is absolutely imperative to bring consciousness. And I see the picture as the chalice into which consciousness is poured, and it is the consciousness and the clarity that comes with aligning ourselves in the divine, in the realization that it is poured into us, and it goes along with the meal. For as we partake of the salad, as we partake of the teachings, as we make the story our own, we also grow in consciousness, and we pour consciousness into ourselves. There is a way in which we experience ordinary consciousness, and that is absolutely beautiful. But I want to experience the passion of living. I want to experience being intoxicated with the divine. To be so immersed and so in love with the spiritual journey and its expression through me as each and every one of you open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. It is to that type of intoxication, that type of engagement, that the great poets and mystics speak of. And so it becomes important then that as we take this in and we pour it into our experience, that we allow ourselves to become drunk with the divine. Drunk. So that as we share the beauty and the gloriousness of our very being, what is it that we see? We see the divine. So that it becomes the very ground of our being, that what we think, say, and do are an expression of the divine. I want to be drunk upon the divine. Rumi, in one of his poems, opened by saying that the guest arrived unexpectedly. My heart asked, "Who is there?" My soul replied, "It is the moon." It is in the heart, it is in the soul, it is in the moon, it is in the sun, it's in the flame, it's in the beauty of living, that when we become intoxicated with the divine, then the story that we are telling, the story that we are crafting, takes on these dimensions of great grandeur, take on these great dimensions of joy and of bliss, which is ultimately, what I believe we are here to experience is the joy of living. So my friends, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Amen.